Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am 12 Kyle. Check this out. As many of you know, or maybe you don't know, June is Black Music Month. And what we've done this month is made a conscious decision to focus each and every episode that's dropped, with the exception of Father's Day. Every episode that's dropped has dealt with music and honoring Black music in Black Music Month in the month of June. So this episode will be no different as we close out the month of June. What I want to talk about is hip hop. And more specifically, I came across this article, and I saw this article, I don't know, maybe about 6 months ago, and I saved it in my notes or what have you. But the thing that caught my eye was it said the 25 most important hip hop albums of the 90s. Now that's saying a lot, because here's the thing. There were so many albums that dropped in the 90s. If you were around in the 90s, you know that there were several music shifts in the 90s. And some of the music that I'm going to talk about, or that made this particular list, will reflect that, right? But of course, anytime you're talking about lists, the thing that I always say is, you should ask yourself, well, what's the criteria? And if there's no criteria that's established, then you really could be talking about someone's uninformed opinion. In this case, they didn't give a particular criteria, but they listed what they deemed on this particular website, I think it was MSN, the 25 most important hip hop albums of the 90s. And again, that is a very broad spectrum, because there was so much dope hip hop music that came out in the 90s. Now, the thing that I do like about this list of these 25 albums is that they did not rank them, which is important, because I think when you use a word like important, obviously that's opinionated. I mean, I don't know, maybe DMX's album Is Dark and Hell Is Hot was an important album to me, and it may not be important to you. So I like the fact that they did not rank these albums in any particular order. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read you the list, and the way that they separated the list was they just did it in chronological order. So they started from 1990 and went on down to 1999. So again, I think it's dope because, in the 80s, obviously we saw the training wheels come off, if you will, in hip hop and rap, because it was referred to as rap at that time. And then the 90s, became the backbone of what we know hip hop is is today. So again, and I'm only speaking from experience. It's hard enough as a fan of hip hop to make a top 25 on a particular year. So if you say, hey, give me your top 25 of 1994, that's not easy to do. Give me your top 25 of 1996. That's damn near impossible, right? So to condense it to 25 albums, important albums of the 90s in that decade, that's saying a lot. And so without further ado, here we go. Number one, again, they're in no particular order. They're only in chronological order. Number one, 1990, Ice Cube, America's Most Wanted. Listen, man, that album, wow, that album to me still gets a lot of major play for me. Obviously, it's a solo album from Ice Cube. He had left NWA, which, and I mentioned before when I did the album review, It was a very risky move. I mean, we saw in R&B and maybe a little bit in rock, you would see an artist leave the group and then go solo. But for Ice Cube to leave NWA, the world's most dangerous crew, and to go solo and to produce this album was incredible. That album sonically is one of the best albums, I think, in the 90s. Incredible. I'm a huge Ice Cube fan and a huge fan of this album. That's coming in at number 1. And again, no particular artist because it's 1990. Number 2, Public Enemy, Fear of a Black Planet. This one's high on my list as well. This was Public Enemy's third album. The follow-up to It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, which came out in 1988. The greatest year in hip hop. But yeah, it was Fear of a Black Planet sonically was crazy as well. And then you also have to understand too that Fear of a Black Planet and Ice Cube's album, America's Most Wanted, were both produced by the legendary Bomb Squad. So there's a tie there as far as, both of those albums. But both incredible albums, and I think worthy of being on this list. Number 3, 1992, Dr. Dre, The Chronic. The Chronic in 1992, I think. The Chronic was one of the few albums, I think, that shifted the genre of hip hop. Not a lot of people can say that. Dr. Dre, the G-Funk sound, it helped really establish the supremacy that the West Coast had on hip hop in the 90s. That was the, they planted a flag in the ground right there. And it couldn't be denied, regardless of whether or not you liked Dr. Dre or you like Suge Knight or you like Death Row Records or anybody or anything. Their dominance I'll make a case that their dominance started with this particular album. And this album, again, I think changed the genre of hip hop. Not just being a West Coast album, it changed the entire genre of how music was perceived. Dr. Dre in particular got a lot of airplay on black radio, white radio, crossed over onto MTV. This album was huge. And I mean, songs like G Thing and, classics like that. I mean, you know why, Dre Day, just to name a few. So that's definitely worthy of being on this list. Number 4, 1992, The Far Side. The album title, Bizarre Ride to the Far Side. This is a very good album. A very, very good album. It's one of the few albums on this list that I did not purchase, but of course I heard it. But yeah, I really like this album. I think there's going to be this is where I think it gets tricky, because I think if you ask some hip hop fans, they will tell you that this album definitely needs to be on this list as far as one of the top 25 most important hip hop albums in the 90s. And then there's another faction of people, I think, that if you talk to, they will tell you that this album probably doesn't belong on this list. So it really just depends on who you ask, I think. But it is a dope album. And it was something very different from what we were getting in hip hop. Again, it's 1992, so the West is coming, and this group is from the West. But, they sample Marvin Gaye, they sample Roy Ayers, they sample Quincy Jones. I think, with songs like Passing Me By, I think that they laid the groundwork for albums to sound and look and have a certain feel that didn't have to be necessarily gangster. So, in that sense, that may put them on this list. Number 5, 1992, Eric B. and Rakim, Don't Sweat the Technique. I'm going to say something that's probably controversial. Well, I mean, I don't care. It's my podcast, but this album doesn't belong on this list. This album does not belong on this list. I think this album made this list because of the love and respect and the compassion that people have for Eric B. and Rakim. And if I'm not mistaken, this was their last studio album together. And I'm a huge fan of Eric B. and Rakim, and I think Rakim's the greatest lyricist ever. But this album doesn't belong. This isn't really that good of an album. I think this album is probably, if I had to give it mics, it's probably a 3. It is my least favorite Eric B. and Rakim album. There's only a couple of songs on this album that I'm actually going to listen to, and I still listen to this day. It might be 3 songs on this album that I listen to. The rest of it, nah, it's just not there. And Eric B. and Rakim are kind of going through the thing and whatever like that, so you can kind of tell. But nah, this ain't it. Now, if you want to, if you think I'm wrong, I mean, I'm apt to listen. You ain't gonna change my mind, but I don't think this album belongs on this list. I'm sorry. It's a good album, not a great album. It's not better than any of the classics that they put out prior to this album, but it made the list. It made their list. So, hey, it is what it is. Number 6, 1993, From the Slums of Shaolin. The Wu-Tang Clan Strikes Again. The RZA, the GZA. I can go on and on. 1993, Wu-Tang Clan, Enter the 36 Chambers. Yes. Hell yes. This album definitely belongs on this list. Another one I think that is genre changing. 9 dudes out of a borough that most people had never paid attention to in hip hop. And their unique style, their references, how they came as solo artists and came in together as a group, unprecedented. I could talk all day about Wu, but this album definitely is one of the best albums from the 90s. I don't think that is for debate. And so definitely it is one of the most important albums from the 90s. Number 7, 1993, Doggy Style, Snoop Doggy Dogg. Definitely. Again, I mentioned earlier about the West and their dominance. If you don't have this album, I don't know what happens, because Doggy Style was that Doggy Style rode on the shoulders of the Chronic, obviously, and the Chronic introduced us to a young Calvin Broadus Jr., aka Mr. Let It Be Known Snoop Dogg. So yeah, I mean, like, I don't know that if we don't have the Chronic, then we definitely don't have Doggy Style. And Doggy Style was incredible. It not only put Death Row to another stratosphere, but it put Snoop on the map as far as an MC. And it was incredible. I mean, like, it is an album that, I still love listening to this day. So definitely at number 7, Doggy Style. Number 8, 1993. A Tribe Called Quest, Midnight Marauders. Wow. This album is one of my favorite albums, period, in any genre. It is an album that I never get tired of listening to. If there was an album that people could say kind of started to bring the East Coast back, it was this one. Rest in peace, Phife Dawg. I love this album. I literally could talk about it forever. One of the dopest tracks on the album, Electric Relaxation. Timeless classic in my opinion. That album still bangs to this day and it still goes. Number 9, 1993, Souls of Mischief. 93 Till Infinity is the name of the album. This is a very, very dope album. I think for a long time, this was a very, very slept on album. I think you might get some pushback from some people when you look at the total list of who all the albums that actually made the albums that were actually created that particular year, and then you look at the albums from the 90s, you may get some pushback on this one. But I think it's a very, very dope album. I think it's worthy of the discussion on being on this list. Again, it was West Coast, but it wasn't gangster rap. And so I think when, and it really doesn't get talked about a lot, but Souls of Mischief, they were a part of the West Coast dominance. People think like when you start talking about West Coast in the 90s, it wasn't all just Death Row. I mean, like, they had some smokers coming out of the West. And by this time, it was some hip hop fans, not all, some, that had made a conscious decision as to whether or not they were going to listen to West Coast hip hop. I wasn't one of them. I was going to listen to whatever. And the West Coast was dope. They made some banging ass music. So I was listening. At the end of the day, I'm a fan. So I'm a fan of music. So if you got dope shit, I'm listening to dope shit. I'm sorry. It is what it is. Number 10, speaking of the West, Black Sunday is the album. The year is 1993. The group is Cypress Hill. With songs like Insane in the Membrane, I will say that this is an incredibly dope album that I never really got into. Not really sure why. Cypress Hill was always those dudes that I knew were dope, and I knew that they made good music, and I knew that they had a really good fan base, but I never purchased any Cypress Hill music. Not really sure why either. But I think they're worthy of the discussion on being on this list. Number 11, 1994. Nas, Illmatic. This album, in my opinion, is the greatest hip-hop album created in the 90s. Period, point blank. Now, we can discuss it, and I probably can tell you 10 different ways as to why you're wrong. But I'll say it again. This album, in my opinion, unequivocally is the best album that was best hip hop album that was created in the 90s. And so most definitely it is worthy of being on this list of the top 25 most important hip hop albums of the 90s. I tell people all the time, like, the only knock that you could probably give this album is that it's 39 minutes. It is what it is. It's not long. Didn't have to be long. He got in and he got out. Again, one of the greatest albums, in my opinion, one of the greatest hip hop albums of all time. So it's definitely worthy of being on this list. Number 12, 1994. The Notorious B.I.G. Ready to Die. This is a cold ass album. This album, if there's any talk about how or why the East Coast came back, Biggie had something to do with it, so you could say that Biggie helped bring the East Coast back. I think this album still resonates. I will say this much, and I've said this before, and it's worth repeating. I think this album tends to be, or both of his albums actually, I think are really held in very high regard, especially the second album. And I think they're held in really high regard more so because Big isn't here anymore. But don't get it twisted. Both dope albums. This is a very dope album. I probably can do without Suicidal Thoughts, which I went a long time without listening to, the last track on the album. But still an incredible album nonetheless. Number 13, 1994. Dude out of Houston, Texas, Scarface. The album, The Diary. Man, Liz. Wow. You talk about putting the South on the map. I mean, I'm a huge Scarface fan, huge Ghetto Boys fan from like day one. But this album with songs like Never Seen a Man Cry Until I Seen a Man Die, got a lot of airplay, a lot of run in my car, in my dorm at South Carolina State University. And it still bumps. There may be some who push back on whether or not it should be on this list, but I can make a case that it should be. Number 14, 1996, an incredible year in hip hop. The group, The Fugees. The album, The Score. Whoo, cold. What can I say? This album really took off. I mentioned it in the album review that I did. Some people don't know this, but the Fugees were close to getting dropped because The Score is the second album. Their first album, Blunted on Reality, didn't do well, and their record label was about to drop them. And for those of you listening at home and watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. If you got dropped from your label, that was it. Like, ain't no more recording, nothing. You're done. And you'd be lucky to get picked up by somebody else. So, and I don't think Blunted on Reality was a bad album. I thought it was pretty decent. But, a lot of people came from that album. I mean, a lot of people walked away thinking, well, the girl is dope. These other two dudes, we don't really know. And they came back and they delivered something incredible. Sold a gazillion copies, and their music was all over MTV and black radio, white radio. Videos were everywhere, and a star was born in Lauryn Hill. So definitely worthy of being on this list. Number 15, Raekwon. 1995, Only Built for Cuban Links, aka the Purple Tape. Listen, this album is fire. I'm biased because I'm a Wu-Tang fan. I'm biased because I'm a Raekwon fan. But there are a lot of people who think that this is the best album of the 90s, best hip hop album of the 90s. If you say that, I'm not I'm not going to argue with you. I can't. It's an incredibly dope album. the Purple Tape still goes hard to this day. To this day. Yeah, man. Crazy. Number 16. Also from 1995. Mobb Deep. The Infamous. And I don't know how they jumped around because they went from 95 to 96. But anyway. Crazy. This album, man, listen. It's right up there with the Purple Tape is one of the best albums in 1995, which is saying a lot because 1995 was an incredible year for hip hop. So you get no argument from me. I mean, Shook Ones Part 2, what can I say? Incredible. Then we move to number 17. So then they go back to 1996. A double album from Tupac, Amaru Shakur, entitled All Eyes on Me. This was a crazy album from Tupac. It's not my personal favorite. I think Me Against the World is a better album. I've said it before and I'll say it again. As much as I love this album, it should have been one disc, not two, because there are some filler tracks on the second disc. But that being said, almost everybody and their mama love this album. And I do too. I just think it's too long, and I think they've got way too many filler tracks on here. But Pac crushed it. He crushed it. We all know the story. He was, paying off his death row, and he created something that was really, really incredibly dope and still resonates with people to this day. Number 18, 1996, Lil' Kim, Hardcore. The debut album from Lil' Kim. I don't know about this one. I think it is a really good album. She had Crush on You, Not Tonight on that joint. Personally, I don't think it was as good as Foxy Brown's album, The Il Nana. We all remember Hardcore for the album cover. I mean, who doesn't? But the most important, I don't know. I would let me just put it like this. If I were creating a most important top 25, this album doesn't make it. This album is a very solid album in 1996, which is a very great year for hip hop. But no, hell no. I understand how and why she made it. I wouldn't have put it on the list, but that's just me. Number 19, another album from 1996. Reasonable Doubt from Sean Corey Carter, aka Jay-Z. This album is still incredibly dope. Is one of the best albums from 1996. I think it's a classic album. But the thing that I always try to impart to people as someone who was around and someone who was outside in 1996, nobody was talking about this album in 1996. This album clearly took off and started resonating with people in 97, definitely in 98. It got better over time. But I think, and I could be wrong, and I'm not looking this up, so if you want to fact check me, you can. I think even to this date, at the time of this recording, I think this is still Jay-Z's least selling album. Like he didn't sell well on this album. But I promise you, even as someone who purchased this album in 1996, there wasn't a whole bunch of people that purchased the album in 1996. And there was nobody, I repeat, nobody in 1996 calling this album a classic, myself included. I've said it before and I'll say it again. My least favorite song on this album is Ain't No. I hate that song. Everything else I love. When I listen to this album, and I listen to it all the time, I skip that song. Don't like it. Number 20, 1997. Again, the Notorious B.I.G., Life After Death. If you're familiar, this album came out 2 weeks after Biggie was tragically murdered. Again, I say the same thing about this album that I said about Tupac's Double album. Should have been a single disc. That's one thing. And I think it's revered a whole lot more because Big is no longer with us. That's not to say that it's not a dope album, but it's a lot of filler tracks. And I think if Big were still alive, I don't know if people would love it as much as they do. I love it. It's a dope album. I still listen to it. But when people start saying, oh, yeah, it's a classic, it's a classic, I don't necessarily know if people would have called it a classic if Big were still alive. It is what it is. Number 21, 1998. My boys from Atlanta, Outkast, Aquemini. Man, listen. This album is so incredibly dope. It makes no sense. I think if you get rid of the Mamacita track, it's a flawless album. It's an incredible listen. It's still an incredible listen to this day. And, that was vintage Dre and Big Boy. Vintage Dre and Big Boy. Number 22, 1998. Lauryn Hill. The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Nah, that ain't it. And the reason why I say that's not it is because it is not a hip hop album. I'm not sure as to how or why people keep putting this album on hip hop lists when it's not a hip hop album. If I'm not mistaken, Lauryn Hill actually raps on 2 or 3 tracks. The rest she's singing. You can call it a soul album. You can call it an alternative album. You can call it a neo soul album. It's probably closer to neo soul than it is anything else. Hip hop it ain't. Lauryn Hill is a incredible dope MC, but she ain't rapping on this album. She's not. So how this album makes the list, people get it confused, man. This album shouldn't be on this list. As much as I love this album, as much as I play this album, as incredibly dope and how much I love L Boogie back then, no, it doesn't belong on here because it's not a hip hop album. Period, point blank. Number 23, 1999. Eminem, the Slim Shady LP. That was a joint that had My Name Is. So I think it was Eminem's second album. I think you can make a case for it being on this list. I'll be honest. I may have heard that album 3 times. Not Eminem's music, and I've mentioned before, and I'll say it again. Eminem's music, for as incredible as an MC as he is, his music has no replay value for me. Like Slim Shady LP, the Marshall Mathers Project, all of his albums. I mean, like I'm never going back to this stuff. It is what it is. His music doesn't move me like that. But for him to make this list, I think you can make a case that he should be on this list, and this album should be on this list. Number 24, 1999, Mos Def, Black on Both Sides. I absolutely love this album. Should it have made the list? I don't know. I can think of some that I could replace this album with, but that's not what we're here for. But it made the list as one of the most important albums. I think it's Mos Def's lyricism and how he carries this album and how he carries himself as an MC. You can make a case that it should be on this list. I'm not tripping off of it. I think I probably could find some other albums that I could replace it with, but I'm not mad at it being here. And last but not least, number 25, 1999, the legendary crew from the 215, the legendary Roots crew, Things Fall Apart, coming in at 25. Of course, they had to smash You Got Me with Erykah Badu. They won a Grammy. I love this album. It is the Roots' second best album. I think their best album is Philadelphia Half-Life, which came out in 1996. Now, because that is a personal favorite of mine, I would put that album and replace that album on this list. I may be in the minority, but I love Philadelphia Half-Life. That album still gets a lot of play from me, excuse me, on a monthly basis. But no, Things Fall Apart. I'm not putting it on there. I'm not putting it on my list. But, there you have it. That's 25 of the most important hip hop albums from the 90s. Did they get it right? That is a very good question. I really don't have a great answer as to whether or not they got it right. I think you can make a case for some albums being on this list. I think a few like The Chronic are no-brainers. There's some that are kind of on the fringe. And then there's some that, again, personally, you take an album like Hardcore, I'm not putting Hardcore on any most important list. Now, if you want to say the best album covers, yes. But no, I'm just not doing that. Just not doing it. But yeah, hit me up. Tell me what you think. I think this has been a great way to close out the month of June. If you missed any of the episodes, we did a lot of different things talking about music, black music in particular. Like I said, the only episode that we did not do pertaining to black music was the Father's Day episode with myself, Baylor, and Uncle Dolomite. So check out those episodes. Check out all the episodes. Make sure that you download, subscribe, and then tell a friend too. I mean, that helps. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. Thank you for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Again, be sure to download, subscribe, share with your friends. Remember that the podcast drops every Thursday at midnight. From time to time, we drop bonus episodes on Sundays at midnight. Make sure that you check out the YouTube channel. All of the episodes are on YouTube, not the music, but they're on YouTube. And be sure to, if you feel inclined, hit us up on Cash App, $TWELVEKYLE. Again, that's going to do it for me. We have discussed the 25 most important hip hop albums from the 90s. Again, I'm your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5 G's.